Hi, guys. Welcome to the TOWTalk Podcast. Today is Sunday, June 14th, and with me today is Town of Wallkill Supervisor Frank Dendanto. We're going to discuss the $4 million aid package, some new laws he's proposed for the town, and other things. But before we get started, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Click that bell so you get notified when new videos drop and when we go live on Tuesday nights at 8 p.m. And also, leave us a comment of 7 words or more to feed that algorithm. Without any further delay, let's get into it. Hey, Frank, how are you? Welcome to the show. It's great to see you again.
Hey, Denise, it's great to be back. Thank you very much for having me.
All right. So big news, right? It's been an exciting week. You got the $4 million to help with our finances from the states. Can you give us a little background about how you got that rolling and how this happened?
Absolutely, Denise. Well, so as I'm sure you all know, as I'm sure you all and all of your listeners know, when I first got into office about the second week, I was faced with a huge conundrum, which is that the town did not have enough funds to make payroll. That
Yes.
required a huge scramble on our part, specifically my part, to figure out where we could offset funds and cover that payroll until the town was made flush in the 2026 tax period. So what we did was we borrowed against 2026 in that we took in some tax base at that point, and we liquidated the small amount of annuity that was left at the town, and that got us over the hump. That said, extrapolating it forward, there was this huge gap of roughly $4 million in the sorry about that.
No,
In
that's
the
okay.
in the budgeting. And the reality is that when you have a shortfall like that, it obviously impacts the entire year. So we did some very specific and complicated math to figure out when our current funding was going to dry up. That pointed roughly to mid fall. So working backwards, we figured that the shortfall was $4 million and that the only solution that we could do would be to ask the state for aid. As I'm sure you're aware, a number of municipalities in the community around Orange County are faced with the same problem, are faced with the same problem, none quite so severe as the town of Wallkill. So in my infinite wisdom, I decided that there was no other choice but to ask our elected representatives at the state level to review our situation and if they could help us make that ask at the state level. So they asked me to put together a narrative and to tool the town so that that narrative wasn't, hey, we have our hand out and we need a bailout. It was, what is the town of Wallkill going to do in effort to make a good faith argument to receive that kind of aid? And so I sat with each of all of the departments of town and with the comptroller in town and with my calculator, and this Master of Fine Arts guy created a specific ask where we dialed back all of the departments as far back as we possibly could without severely impacting services, which got us to roughly 20% across the board. And then with that 20% ask, we placed that ask inclusive to the state for the $4 million shortfall so that we didn't have to cut back services at all. That got the state
Wow.
representatives. I know there's a lot of math there. That got the state representatives' attention. They went through with their own finance folks and came to the same conclusion with the same amount of math. And then they took that conclusion to the broader Assembly and Senate, where both the speakers in both those houses also did their own math and spoke to their finance people and then vetted it down to the budget people and then vetted it up to the governor's office to make sure that the state wasn't going to just be throwing money at a bad idea, that the town of Wallkill had a plan moving forward. And so after running the gauntlet and getting through all of those hurdles, the state found it within its wisdom to include that ask within its budget for 2026. And we've got $2 million out of the Senate, thanks to Senator Scofus, and $2 million out of the Assembly, thanks to Assemblywoman Kay. So that's how we got here. And that announcement was made on Monday, which we were very excited to do. So we have staved off the level of impact for 26, which would have been substantial. And I can now
Really?
speak with, yeah, I can now speak with very specific clarity about what that would have meant had we not gotten over this hurdle.
Yeah, yeah. If you could elaborate, I think it's important for our listeners and watchers to understand just how bad it was.
It was dire to say the least. What I did discover was that the town was going to fall short by roughly 2, probably 3 months worth of operating costs, and that what was necessary to get over that hump was a drastic reduction across the board. And what that equated to, what I will tell you is that initially what that equated to was a nuclear option that led us at first to just close the town for a month. And obviously that's not something.
God.
Yeah, I know it was really bad. Now I will say, because I am an individual who sort of likes dark humor a little bit. I will say that I jokingly said to my inner circle, "Well, I guess that will bring us in line with the European model, and that we'll just all take August off, and that will be it." I don't know if anybody's been, or any of your listeners, I'm sure they have been to Europe any in the summer. If you try going anywhere in the continent in the month of August, Germany, Italy, Belgium, France, you will have been met with zero municipal support. So if you have any reason to speak to the ticketing office higher than the billing agent at the train station, or you need to
You
go
better
take
do it
care
by
of
July
you
31st.
you better do it by July 31st, because they're not talking to you until September 1. And that's real. They shuttered the buildings. It's a ghost town. So uh, that was a little dark humor on my part, but the reality was is that I needed to buy back that much time. So what we did look at was a nuclear option that included scaling back all of the departments, and that it meant, roughly 97 jobs which would have been furloughed or put out on layoff. And that had a substantial impact, both at the PD department. It was roughly a 70% reduction at the police department, a 70% reduction at the Department of Public Works, 50% reduction across Building A, which would have been the building department, the assessor's office, and planning and zoning. And what that means for everybody is a substantially walked back amount of support through the months of October, November, and December. Um,
Yeah, going
now,
into the winter and snow.
exactly, going into the winter and snow. So um, these are not things to be taken lightly. Obviously, in some respects, there were mutual aid overlaps that allowed us to walk back that biggest step. Um, what I can say is, with the sheriff's department and state police department overlapping with the town of Wallkill, well, it would not go unnoticed walking back the PD that far. At least the community would stay relatively safe. The same holds true with the county and the state in terms of plowing, because we have a number of county and state roads in town, which is part of the reason why those two departments took the heavier hit. Uh, that said, all of it was averted. And that was the plan C part of this. The plan B part of this, which we were in active communication about at the state level with both the senator and the assemblywoman prior to uh, the assembly and the Senate voting on the budget, was a fallback position where we would ask the state to bond us or act as our bonding agent so that we could borrow forward. But this instance, the plan A instance, was that the state step in and recognize what kind of impact that would be for the state voters and what kind of impact that would be for our community. And they heard us.
Good. That's good. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, so ultimately, because there was rumors going around that property taxes were going to increase by 70%. Obviously, based on what you're telling me, that is that going to happen, or that's not going to happen?
No, that's off the table. It was initially thought that perhaps it would be necessary to keep services at the current budget, that it would have to be an increase of 70%. That was a number that we came up with in the very beginning of the year, at the very beginning of this crisis. What we did discover, walking all the way through and doing all the math, was with the 70% reduction at PD, 70% reduction at DPW, and the 50% reduction in Building A, we would only have had to have raised the property taxes 36.5%. So that's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous statement to say, well, it's not 70%, it's
It's
36.5%.
only
But
right.
um, and that's way better than 70%, but it's still catastrophic. Like, that is a catastrophic hit for a number of residents in our community. And I think that it speaks boldly to where the past administrations put us because of their inaction, because they kicked the can down the road, because they never reconciled the bank accounts, because they assumed they understood how much money was in the fund balance while whittling away at that fund balance. They did the thing that most individuals, I will say younger individuals who have a brand new checking account, who don't reconcile their checking account, discover the hard way, which is, if you're not watching your money, then you will literally spend it away. So,
That's it.
yeah, and that's what happened. From 2021, where we had an $11 million fund balance, we went down to under $1 million.
Wow, that's when you walked in the door, January 1st.
Yeah, I walked in the door. The actual dollar amount was $1.2 million, split in two funds. We had to liquidate roughly 80% of that to make payroll that first week.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow. So okay. So let's go on here. So then so what are the next steps? Has the budget process for next year started yet? And
Yes, the budget process has obviously started already, because we had to do a huge exercise to get us scaled back enough to make an argument to the state uh, as to why we deserved that cash and what we were putting on the table to get that cash. So that exercise occurred. We know what that entailed, and we know what that outcome was. We stepped that entire town down 20%. We held those numbers. They continue to be held. They're going to continue to be held straight through 26, which should finish 26 with a mild surplus. That, coupled with the fact that we didn't have to completely liquidate the fund balance, allows us a starting place roughly where we were in this year, in 26. The one thing that I can tell you is that with the $4 million from the state, we will not be liquidated by the end of December. We will be funded through the end of December and through the end of January. So that money will be able to remain intact. And that will act as seed money for us moving forward as we build out 27 and 28.
okay. So you said you had to scale back 20%. Oops. Whoops. You said you had to scale back 20%. Can you kind of outline what different things you had to scale back for that?
Sure. What we did was we collectively sat with all the departments, and when I say we, it was really mostly myself and the department head sat with our budget lines as they were passed in 26, what their budget lines were when they started their budgeting process in 26 with the past administration, and then what the past administration gave them. What I discovered was that the past administration was non-inclusive with the departments. Like, there was not really a conversation that occurred with the departments in any real way. The departments were brought in a single sitting, and then they would lay out their best case scenario for what the town probably needed in terms of general maintenance, and then what it was looking for in terms of growth. And then that information sort of disappeared into the ether of the supervisor's office, and out popped some other third number where the departments were mandated an operating number moving forward into 26. So there was ambiguity from the starting spot, and there was an ambiguity from the finishing spot to understand where they actually were. And then from that place, we had to determine what exactly the number was and how it affected their actual operating budget for 26, and whether or not there were any scaling back that was required there, and there was. And then from that number, pull it back an additional 20%. So we sat with every department. I sat with every department, and all of us collectively, department heads, walked through and said, okay, so here's how we're going to get to that number. We're going to reduce the road paving by 20%. We're going to reduce the overhead by 20% by reducing overtime by 20% going into the summer. So summer projects that would normally have eaten up overtime, we're not going to eat up the overtime. On projects that were generally funded outside of the operating system, so staffing for special projects that normally don't get billed back, such as additional police services for special events at the fairgrounds or special events at food kitchens, at food pantries. These things were either going to be drastically scaled back or not provided, or provided at a cost to the vendor. So we spoke with the fairgrounds, and we spoke to some of the food pantries and some of the other special events items that were on the docket. We looked forward at what the Fourth of July event and the other special events that the town does, what the impacts were on those, and we scaled those back. Um, and then, of course, lastly, we decided to take a long, hard look at the staffing in terms of retirement and attrition aspects of retirement for each and every department. And then we're able to walk back roughly 12 positions by the end of the year, and when those positions were going to actually, when those individuals were going to actually retire out, and then not fill those positions, leave the role funded, but not fill the position in 27, so as to buy back some of that time, either 6 months of that time or additional time. So we were looking at staffing through attrition as well.
Okay. So in follow up to that, how this is sort of like leading towards a recovery of our finances, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. And how long do you think it will take, overall for us to get
Uh,
there?
So if we stay the course and we execute 27 the way I think we should execute 27, and continue into 28 uh in that same frame of mind, then I think that it'll probably take us about 3.5 to 4 years to get us back to somewhere in the ballpark of $6 million on the fund balance. And that also is somewhat dependent on how aggressively we pursue some of the extra ratables that I've been talking about in the past couple of months.
Okay. So wow. So think about that. So when you left office in 2021, you said there was an $11 million fund balance, and you walked in with just over a million coming in 2026, and it's going to take 3 to 4 years to build that fund balance up to 6 million. So basically a little more than half of what you left with in 2021.
Yeah.
Wow.
Denise, the sad fact of of the matter is this: it's way easier to spend than it is to earn it back. Towns are in a unique spot. I actually said these words directly to the county legislature a couple weeks ago, or about a month ago now, when there was this grand economic faux pas that occurred where the county was giving away too much of the tax money. Now, to that end, I say, yay, county. Thank you very much for the additional money, but we're on the hook for the additional money. And that means all the municipalities that are struggling in the county are on the hook for that same additional money. Thankfully, in that exercise, the county did not execute on what I would have considered to be a detrimental tax move by doing a tax holiday on the fuel tax. Uh, and it did aggressively approach the issue with the state through all of its state representatives. This was a broad-based approach that was bipartisan, and it did succeed. So these things were averted, crises were averted, but not without a fair amount of impact in terms of overall budgeting, drama in terms of the execution in the moment, and also, lastly, at the 11th hour, while the state is currently wrapping up its budget, right? So
Yeah.
these things are have monster impact, but the the case really is not so much about those instances as much as it is about, look, if you're not paying attention to your money, it goes away really, really quickly, and you can't just get it back. So what I was saying to the county was, municipalities only have a few ways to make money, and as much as it is a bipartisan talking point that we don't like government, except for when we have a problem with the roads and we want a police officer and we would like potable drinking water, to which I can recognize the frustration with government, certainly. And I certainly recognize the frustration with government from a pedantic place where the parties can't seem to understand that their job is to govern, not to bicker with one another or jockey for control,
Yes.
but to actually govern. I said, look, there's no real good way for us to earn back the money that we have completely lost here, and now you're about to make it even worse for us. So that's a real thing that people lose track of a lot. And I think perhaps maybe some of our county legislators have lost track of that. That, these local municipalities are tasked with this idea that we have got to provide safety. We've got to provide clean drinking water. We've got to provide passable roads. These are the meat and potatoes of what we are here to do. And so and that costs money, right?
Yeah.
That costs money.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it costs money to buy material so I can put it in the pothole. It costs money to have a guy in a truck so I can dump the material in the pothole. It costs money to have a police officer on a holiday, driving around, not with his family or her family, but on the job because somebody else caught the bug that's going around. And so now I'm into overtime. Like, these things cost cash. And I really do believe that sometimes the general public loses track of that, right? Because what they see is they see all the other Mishigosh, and they see I'm paying my tax dollars for Mishigosh, and the pothole is still there, and it still takes 15 minutes for a police officer to show up, or, and we have this conundrum, almost
Yeah.
paradoxical, right? But the reality is that it does cost money to run a town. Those items that I just listed out all have high dollar amount attached to them. Some people would argue whether or not the high dollar amount is legit or not. That's certainly a conversation. What you can't decide is that we're just not going to pay for it.
Right,
So,
right, and then expect it to happen. No, we don't wanna pay for it because we don't wanna spend our tax dollars, but we want all these things to happen anyway,
right,
you can't have it
right. And
both ways.
so coming all the way back to, you know, Frank walks through the door and we don't have enough money to pay payroll. And I'm like, okay, I guess we're just closing the town in August. As as flippant as that was, and it was, because it was an internal joke for me to release some of the stress of, what did I just get into here? What did
I
these
get my
guys
ass
do?
into.
What did these guys do? I had to come up with a plan. And then, of course, you look at it, well, we're just that's it. Well, everyone's going to take August off. You can't do that, because guess what? You can't leave nobody at the water plant. The water plant needs people. You can't, you can maybe get away with a fewer police officers because we have the state police and the county sheriffs, but let's make no bones about it. Those guys have their own gigs going on. So while they can help cover, there's no world where you can't have a police department. There's no world. So, and let's face the world that we're living in. The world that we're living in is increasingly more dangerous, increasingly more volatile. So there's no world where you can't have a police department or an active police department that's just not of a town size of 38,000. That
Yeah,
surrounds a
absolutely.
city of 40,000. So these are the realities that the town of Wallkill was faced. So we, like I said, we looked inward. We took a long, deep, hard look at the math and the money and figured out how to get to where we needed to be so that we can get there. But it doesn't come back immediately. It comes back very slow. And at the end of the day, really what we are looking at a $6 million uptick by the end of 28, beginning of 29 is a real success because we
Wow.
have delivered the town from the jaws of despair and maintained the services that everyone is already used to having. And we did all of that inside of 6 months and managed to make a cogent argument to the state of New York where they were willing to help us and understand why that economic engine was important to maintain. So I feel pretty good with what I've been doing here in the time that I've had. I look forward to the opportunity to do more.
That's great. This is good to hear. Since we're on the topic of finances, a lot of people talk about past issues with the finances. I know audits are still sitting open from I think going back to like 2023, 2024. And I know you have an accounting firm working on that. Is there any status or updates that you can give us regarding these audits?
I can tell you that 23 is for all intents and purposes uh, closed in the bank reconciliation side. We have begun the AFR on 23. We're hopeful to have that wrapped up by the middle of July. The holidays probably going to get in the way a little bit, but at the end of the day, I think that we'll be able to get there by mid-July. 24 is fast on its heels. It looks like 24 reconciliations will be in line by the end of July, which means that we can start our AFR for August on 24. Uh, and if 23 and 24 finish out in the way that we think it's going to finish out, it will get us a head start on 25, which we're a little behind on, but that would make us current and we would be able to do the AFR, the closeouts by the end of August, beginning of September, and the AFR by the end of September. So we should be fully up to speed by the end of September, beginning of October. That will again position us to make an argument to start to claw back our bond rating. Obviously, just like any other credit rating review, time has to happen. We've got to be in good standing for a little while. But what we did not do is we did not lose that runway and we did manage to hold on to a little bit of cash so that we have some seed money. So when we begin 27, we'll be able to start actually from a positive place, from a cash flow positive place that I think coupled with some opportunities that I've been working on quite uh, heavily with respect to additional ratables to the town should allow us, I think, a trajectory where by 29 we have that number that I was talking to you about.
All right. So this sounds like good news. It kind of makes you wonder because here you are, you've kind of, hit the ground running and right away went into those books and you're getting books that are now 3 years old, 2 years old, done before the end of this year. It kind of makes you wonder what were the other people doing that it didn't get done when it was supposed to be. Shouldn't 2023 have been done in 2024 and 2024 and 2025?
Yes, 100%. And that's a really valid question. I think the voters absolutely should be asking that question. I appreciate that my administration's here now. But let's face it, we're in an election cycle. And as much as I would love very much not to be out campaigning and, have my nose into these repairs, I have to be mindful of the fact that campaign season has started and the other side is actively out knocking on doors, trying to express that there's no problem or that the problem doesn't exist. Or as I heard over the past week, somehow we've bamboozled the state. And the simple fact of the matter, yeah, I know. That's the real
That's
head scratcher.
hysterical.
It is absolutely hysterical. And to which my response on that was, if I can do that, I'm in the wrong job. I'm in the wrong business. Like I am
Right,
absolutely in
right,
the
right.
wrong business.
Sh should be in the market there, you know?
100%, 100%. No, I mean, I think that the reality is that you cannot detach the impact of where we are and divorce that from the past administrations. You can't. And I try very hard not to get into the politic on these podcasts because it's challenging, and I really have Neil for that. But at the end of the day, that was my little plug for Neil. Um, but the reality is this again, it was a Republican administration with a dino at the helm. So so I, this is their understanding. The group, the organization that's supposed to be business minded, that's supposed to understand numbers and money, these guys who are supposed to be focused on this, like laser focused, were not just asleep at the wheel. They were actively telling people that there was no fire. Like
Right.
they were actively pushing that there's no problem. They're still pushing that there was no problem. I don't even know what to say. At this point, it's not even worth arguing about. Like I
But
can't
somehow
with it.
you managed to bamboozle, the entire county legislature, the entire state legislature, and the governor herself, right?
Yes,
Several hundred
yes.
people.
It's ridiculous. And then you would like, well, those they were all elected. What do they know? No, no, no. They have staffs. They have lawyers and accountants and CPAs, and their entire job is to quite literally go through and make sure you said the thing that you said was real. Because they're not putting their neck on the line for you. They weren't putting their neck on the line for Wallkill unless there was a reason for it. And the reason was Wallkill constitutes one of the biggest, if not the biggest, economic engines for the county. That's huge for Southern New York. Huge. That
Yeah,
matters.
yeah.
It matters. So, you can't think small. And this is all the past administrations did was think small. I'm going to kick the can down another 12 months. We'll deal with the problem next year and it will go away. Or, of course, we have the money. They got to go back to this my teenager running her bank account with running her checkbook when she doesn't balance the checkbook. And she thinks, well, I just got paid. I got $250 in my account. I'm like, yeah, but you just paid your insurance and you just bought that really nice outfit. Well,
Wait, I can't spend any
I
more
don't
money?
understand. Yeah. What,
I
but
got I got credit card. Oh, wait a minute.
they,
Don't have a credit card anymore.
yeah, that's just it. I keep saying the people I run into on the street, we don't have a credit card to go to. The bond rating is gone. So there isn't, I can go out and borrow. I don't even have like I can't even do a fire sale. Like, you can like mortgage your house. I can't do that. So, it required some severe inward looking and it required some actual math skills, business skills to understand how to make an argument that's going to stick with the countless individuals that went through that budget. And there were a lot of them, and they all had very specific ideas. Did you try this? Did you do that? Did you do the other thing?
Yeah.
Every one of them.
Neil said that he attended your board meeting just this past Thursday. So he had a question, and I'm going to try to read this for you. He said at Thursday night's town board meeting, you introduced two new local laws. Can you explain those for our audience?
I sure can. The first local law is a broadband law, and it's in response to some parking issues that are happening out on Shut Road with commercial trucks parking off the road in onto the side part of the road. And can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, because I just got the spinning wheel of death. Uh, So we're looking to just address the zoning overall on commercial vehicles parking on town roads overnight. And this is again born out of a problem that's happening out on Shut Road, but it's a townwide issue because what will likely occur is that those same vehicles will find a new place somewhere else to park just off the town road. The exercise has been that because they are off the road, they're technically not parked on the road, but being parked on the shoulder is also problematic. So the legislation that was put in front of the town board and the town for public hearing is to do away with any kind of commercial vehicle, any box truck of 28 feet or longer, parking overnight on town roads where they don't belong.
Right. Yeah, and this was a problem that at the Spill the Tea events came up a couple of times. A lot of people had a lot of complaints, and it seemed that even when you had attempted to address the issue, these trucks came back.
It's true. They did disappear for a hot second, and then they did exactly that. They came back, and the exercise will be circular if we don't enact legislation to address that in our code. And in the spirit of being as broad as possible and putting this out into the town ether as quickly as possible, I made the exercise of putting this to public hearing immediately. Now, if anybody was dialed in on that meeting, you would have heard Councilman Johnson had some very big opinions about whether or not we should start our legislative process with a broad stroke or start our legislative process with a very narrow stroke. And I don't know that he and I see eye to eye on this. I am of the belief that you put as much on the table as you possibly can to discuss, and then part of the discussion helps narrow down what the law should be. He
Right.
believes
Then you can
that
drill down from there.
exactly. He believes that the law should be tailored and that we should only talk about the laws that are tailored. And if they're not tailored, then we shouldn't talk about them. And the tailoring of that legislation really needs to be in the work session. And I don't know that I agree with that because I think at the end of the day, uh, really, whatever we end up doing has to go out to public referendum anyway. And if we don't get it right the first time because we're talking amongst ourselves, then it's only going to get shot down. And in the
Right.
past administrations have kept legislation off the dais specifically because of that.
Okay.
So,
Interesting. And
yeah,
and all right. So that's the first. So it's just right now in the proposal stage.
correct.
Okay.
Correct.
And and then there's a second law that you were talking about?
Yeah, there were a couple things that were hanging out in the ether. We did just close the rooster law that had a public referendum attached to it. I don't think he's speaking about that one.
We can't have
There,
roosters?
well, the exercise is that you certainly can have roosters. They have to be in the appropriate zone, and you can only have one if you have the appropriate acreage. The idea, I guess, is that sometimes if you just go to certain livestock sellers in the town, they don't really check the gender, can't really check the gender of the roost of the animal prior to selling it. And so there's a crapshoot involved where you might end up with a bunch of roosters.
And no
That said,
hens.
and no hens. Uh, that's a big surprise, I'm sure, to a lot of folks, but it could end up with a bunch of roosters. And I don't know if you've ever been around a bunch of roosters, but when one crows, they all crow, and so it
Oh,
can lead
yeah.
to quite a noise.
Not
So
noisy
we
morning.
did address that. Listen, we do a lot. I love that my opponent thinks that somehow we're not getting a lot of things accomplished because we are moving at light speed and sometimes those things get conflated and it's kind of
Oh,
hard to
yeah.
keep track of what we've managed to put on the table for consideration and what we're still building to put on the table for consideration, and where they are in the discussion from the lawyer's point of view. And so yeah, it's sometimes you forget stuff. It's true. I have a very big brain but not the biggest brain. So We
So,
after yeah, go ahead.
after a slight, brain fart, the second
Literally,
law that I yeah, the second law that I think, Neil is referring to is something to do with battery storage and what kind
yes,
of batteries and what that means.
100% same issue with Mr. Johnson, but again, also the same issue for me. So, as I'm sure you're aware, the big hot topics right now for municipalities is the following. Uh, battery storage, battery backups, these are the new hot developable thing. A couple years ago, it was warehouses. Prior to that, it was high density housing. Now it's battery storage. And for those of you out there who don't know what that really is, you get a bunch of sea containers and you put batteries in the sea containers. And during off peak hours, those batteries charge. And during on peak hours, those batteries discharge, lowering the overall load on the electrical system. And this is now a, a great money making opportunity for developers. And so they're now in on everybody's table. The thing of it is that it's come in so quickly that the town doesn't really have codes to speak to what some of the concerns might be. Now, I will say that a few years ago, Warwick went and did one of these battery developments. I'm sure some of
I was
your
going to bring that up.
viewers are aware. Yeah. That thing burned twice and it burned for quite a while. And
I heard it might still be burning.
I think the second fire is still going. Yes, the first fire is out, but the second fire is still going. I
That's like
believe, or
months.
maybe yes, it goes on for quite. Actually, it might be out now, but they go on forever. There's no way to put them out. There's no way to put the fire out. So because it's a chemical fire and it doesn't require oxygen necessarily to combust, as I'm sure we have all seen with e-bikes. These things burn really, really hot, and they outgas when they burn. There's a lot of hot, heavy metals that burn in the process of that discharge. And there's a lot of concern and question as to the safety about that smoke when it burns. Now, I will say that the industry learned a lot from the Warwick fires. The Warwick fires were and still are today cited as a cornerstone or a benchmark for what not to do. However, the town doesn't really have zoning for this kind of thing. And the reality is that what happens is if we don't have zoning, then if the developer can make a cogent argument and get through planning, then there's a very good likelihood that this thing is going to pop up in areas that it really shouldn't. Right now, battery storage or battery assist storage is the notion, the title covers everything from these sea containers to the battery backups that you put on your garage wall for your Tesla, if you own a Tesla, or if you want to do battery backup for your house. So
Should think about that.
yes, the notion is very, very big. That said, again, counter to what Mr. Johnson said, I believe that this discussion needs to happen in public forum from the very beginning. Are we talking about battery storage in the sea containers? Are we talking about all battery storage to include the Tesla walls? What are we talking about? And when we do talk about it, are we not just making a distinction, but are we saying it belongs in some locations and definitely not in others? So that conversation, in my opinion, needs to be comprehensive, out in the view of the public and with public input. Again, Mr. Johnson believes that that's not necessary, that we can have those conversations internally and that we can put that on the table. And if we're doing our job appropriately, we're going to put that out on the table and the public is going to understand. Mr. Johnson, I think sometimes doesn't give the public credit for understanding these things, but I think that the public does. I think there's not
I
really
think we
going to be
can
a person.
understand safety.
Well, yeah,
Like,
there's not a world where you can walk down the street, anybody in Orange County, and say, "Hey, are you familiar with the battery fire that occurred in Warwick?" 90% of the folks are going to be like, "Oh yeah, is that thing still burning?" So,
exactly what I just said.
so like, there's a world where I don't want to assume that the public isn't aware, and I also don't want to assume that the public isn't going to say, "Well, wait a minute, I just bought a Tesla wall. Are you talking about Tesla walls?" So, I want those conversations to be out in the open. Um, I think that there are certainly in Mr. Johnson's camp, but I would believe maybe some other folks on the town board that feel the same way. Either way, here's what I'm going to tell you: we're going to get to the bottom of it because we're going to have this conversation. Um, there is currently a project, it's in front of planning right now with one of these large scale commercial battery backups. That's the sea containers slated to go in the parking lot area, literally in Price Chopper's parking lot, right next to Wallkill Living. which is one of the higher buildings in town. And if that thing were to catch on fire, it wouldn't take any breeze whatsoever to throw that smoke that would come off that fire up into the Wallkill Living Center. So all of the elderly individuals who are living at that location would be faced with the notion of breathing in those fumes for the duration of that fire. Now, some of your
Wow.
listeners might probably know, I don't know, Denise, if you know, I was on the pile at 9/11. I was there for roughly 5 days as a non-affiliated volunteer, digging through the pile, working at the triage center at Stuyvesant
Really?
School lobby. Yep, showed up the morning after the event, and then was there straight through the weekend when the entire site went to contract to Bovis to do the cleanup that the city went to contract. That's when I left. I will tell you that if you pay attention to the news or any television channel at all, you will hear not one, but a number of law firms out there telling anybody who was south of Canal Street right now, between the hours of 9/11 straight through 1 year later, that they were exposed to toxic chemicals, heavy metals, and asbestos in that burn while it was burning, and that pile burned straight through to Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. It was still
there's no
smoldering even months later.
months later, there's no world right now, given the newness of battery assisted or battery backups, where anybody can tell me that we've done all of the definitive science to say that if these things burn, that the outgassing is somehow safe to breathe in. I know for a point of fact that it is not, because there are guidelines currently, right now, as presented by the developer themselves to the town, that give a perimeter to the fire department. Stand back this far and let it burn. Don't get up any closer. Why?
Wow.
So, and the last part of this was I was told by the developer, no, no, these things have now been engineered to burn clean. To which I'm like, yeah, you know what? I was told there's no
I'm
problem
not
with the
going with
smoke.
that.
Yeah. I was like, that doesn't pass the smell test, no pun intended, right? So, um, so again, in an effort to get out in front of some of this development that's coming down the pike, uh, we put together legislation to be considered. The entire community is in the conversation because it is a public, it's open to public hearing. Anybody can make any kind of comments that they want. We welcome them. We absolutely, you don't have to come to a meeting. You can mail in your comments. You can email your comments either to myself or to the clerk's office, uh, and get on the record telling us what you think of a battery storage place right next to the Wallkill Living Center, or anywhere that isn't right now where there are warehouses. Now, the same developer has a project that's out on West Warren Drive, amongst all those warehouses. There's nothing out there. There's no residential area out there. If that uh, project were again to somehow catch on fire, well, it would be highly problematic from a fire department place. There's no billowing cloud of smoke that's going to go directly into a living area.
True.
Um, so these are some of the things that we think we ought to be out in front of if we want to make our community attractive to the kind of commercial development that's going to offset our economic problem, right? That's part of the other discussion.
Right,
Prior to
right. You're
pri-
trying to bring revenue in.
Right. Well, prior to coming into office, I received a congratulatory phone call from Stephen Newhouse, our county executive. I think Stephen is doing a really good job. I think he's one of the best leaders that I have seen in a long time. I credit his background and his ethical fortitude and his military background to understanding what the mission is. And I think he's doing a fair job at conducting that mission. That said, I was happy to receive a phone call from him congratulating me on winning the supervisor position, and then him promptly asking, almost without a beat, do you plan to open up Wallkill for economic development? Up until that point, the past administrations were very much against having any kind of conversations on any level that were conducive to economic development. If it serviced their specific individual goal, then perhaps maybe they would be supportive. But long-term thinking was completely off the table. So much so that the Republican executive, oh my goodness, county executive, there we go, that the Republican county executive, who is very much dialed into the economic growth of the county, because that's his job to be so, had the wherewithal to ask me if I was going to help him in that process, which of course I said, absolutely. That was where my head was in 2020 and in 2021. And it's where my head is right now, now more than ever, because the town is faced with this economic crisis. So,
Right.
yes, yeah. But no, they did not think about these things. And so to that end, they didn't think about battery storage. They didn't think about long-term parking. They're not thinking about data centers. That's the next piece of legislation that we're
Yeah.
looking to talk about, because data centers chew up lots and lots of water. I've already had a few folks sniffing around because we've got a river, that perhaps
Ugh.
somehow the river is worth tapping for cooling, to which if you've talked to anybody from our water department, they'll tell you we're in a drought. This is, again, the fifth year in a row we've been in a drought. It'll be very likely, if we're lucky, we'll get through with just being in a severe drought and not in being in a crisis situation. Uh,
Yeah. So
we
yeah,
need water. We
I
can't
would
be selling
nix
water
data
to
centers.
processing. Right. We cannot be selling water to processing, for AI. That's not a world that we have a commodity to address. We can sell water perhaps to other communities like Wawayanda and Mamakating, where their communities don't have water and they need it, or to the city of Middletown, where they don't have water and they need it. We can create water agreements, but selling an item that we have a shortage of, that we should be sparing on, isn't something that we should have on the docket. And so we should be forward thinking in our legislation, just like we should be forward thinking in our planning. We shouldn't we shouldn't allow these people to believe that they can come in, that they can write a blank check. So
Right.
yeah,
Right. Yeah. Well, and data centers is a long conversation by itself. Just
sure.
the amount of pollution that they just spew into the air without having any fires, just on a daily basis.
Yeah.
That would be a huge impact to our community, because that kind of pollution just hangs around and it spreads. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing too, I like to talk about, is how I got into this conversation as a supervisor the first time around. I was a huge advocate of some sort of oversight on CPV when it showed up back in 2020. I bumped heads with former supervisor Ed Diana, who told me I was grossly out of my wheelhouse and up above my pay grade, to have a conversation asking the town to do air quality monitoring because CPV's stacks were too low. Now, what does that mean? Well, back in 2020, the stacks are the size that they are, but we sit in a valley. Anybody who's ever skied out west knows what an inversion is. And it's when the weather in the valley maintains the air and particulate in the valley. And so you
Yeah, it
create
sinks.
you create an inversion umbrella and it stays right there, which means any particulate isn't moving away, isn't being dispersed by breeze. It's sticking around. And so we've got to be mindful of that when it comes to data centers. We got to be mindful of that when it comes to CPV. We got to be mindful of that when it comes to accidental fires for battery backup things. These are the forward thinking things that we've got to be thinking about. We can't just come to the table late. Coming to the table late, we should just not be at the table at all.
Right. Right. Let me ask you, why did Cohen was I'm sorry, Johnson, give a reason for why he wanted to have these conversations in a work session and not in front of the public? I mean, this impacts all of us.
I just think he's used to a process. Again, this is a decades long process. Aside from myself and Neil from 20 to 21, this has been a Republican driven administration that really doesn't want to do much out in open. They're very much about facades and making things look a certain way. And when I got on in 20, I was told we don't do resolutions that aren't unanimous. And I was like, what are you talking about? And the simple reality is, no, we absolutely do. that, and we're going to do that. We're going to have these public hearings. We don't need to tool, but I think Mr. Johnson has just been conditioned over a decade worth of sitting at the dais that this is just, standard operating procedure. And the simple reality is it's not. We have an obligation to the public, and so I'm going to uphold that obligation. And I think that um, the councilman for 2 and the councilman for 3 feel the same way, and so that's how we're going to do this.
Yeah. Yeah, it's how it should be done, particularly when you're talking about these batteries and what's happening in Warwick. That,
Yeah,
that is long-term damage. Um,
yeah, I'm waiting because that fire is only a couple of years old. I'm waiting for someone to say the same thing that they said at 9/11. At 9/11, they spent 5 years saying there was no problem with the smoke, there was no problem with the white dust, there was no problem with smelling burning electronics for a year. And everybody should just relax. And only to come find out that not only one round of cancer, but 15 different types of cancer were
yep,
caused from ancillary contact, not direct
yep.
contact.
Mhm.
So, and there were a lot of people, and not just first responders, but there were a lot of people like myself, unaffiliated people who weren't PD, who weren't fire department, who weren't Port Authority, who were down on that site, who were there for months. People who were contractors, steel workers who worked for Boas, cutting up that steel and digging in that dust. Those guys, every one of them was breathing that dust and that smoke. And
And
now we
there's and
know now we know what we know.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because when I was working in corporate law, pretty much every law firm in the city was involved in the suit that sprung from 9/11 as a result of the health problems that developed. And we represented, I think we represented Plaza, and I worked on that case. And so I remember when the settlement came through, and like the 9/11 fund to help these
Yeah,
people that are that are sick. And so,
yeah,
it, it it's a real thing. These types of these batteries, what we're talking about, and data centers, and the turbines that churn out so much pollution into the air. You may not see it, but chances are you're breathing it and being affected by it if you're anywhere within the vicinity, and that vicinity can grow. It can spread. So, folks,
yeah, yeah.
that's why it's important that these conversations be out in the public, and you should be involved with it and asking questions.
Well,
So,
I'm
good for
happy to yeah, I'm happy to do my part there.
yeah, good for you keeping it out in the public. And actually, Neil made a positive comment on that. Do, do, do. Uh, and we already addressed this. I just want to make sure I get Neil's questions. He's not with
Sure,
us today.
absolutely.
So since we're on the topic of things that would happen below the board here, in work sessions, he asked a question, correct me if I'm wrong, but in the past, the board would carefully craft laws with special interest groups, bring them for a public hearing, and then and pass them the same night. Why is this better? Um,
Oh, well, he is speaking exactly to the point that we've been discussing, and the reason this is
okay.
better, he's absolutely correct, and this is exactly what, Mr. Johnson is talking about, and I don't know that, Mr. Johnson wasn't calling out that nefarious act, but that is in fact a nefarious act to work with a special interest group and then quickly pass uh, legislation on the heels of a public hearing and make it look as though you've engaged the public. I think Mr. Johnson's just like, I don't want to open up Pandora's box. To which I will say I recognize both sides of this conversation, but it is better specifically because you can have a conversation about the differences between my Tesla wall, which I spent a couple grand on, maybe 10 grand, and that it powers my house versus 15 sea containers filled with batteries. And that sea container with galvanized steel, which I don't know if anybody understands that when galvanized steel burns, it in and of itself is toxic, not just the batteries. It
Right.
does give off a heavy metal smoke. Um, that these things, the more that we have the conversation out in the open, the better. Mr. Johnson made reference to the parking law as an issue. That he has friends and they've got commercial plates, and according to the new law, the way that it's framed, that his friends wouldn't be able to park on the road. That's a gross distortion and understatement of the law. The simple fact of the matter is there's no parameter where that is on the table. The exercise with the public is to whittle that back so that said individual can come and say, well, wait a minute, what about my commercial plates on my pickup truck? Does that mean I can't stop at my friend's house with my truck on the side of the road? Versus storing your 28-foot box truck so that it is just off the curb of the road, sitting on the shoulder in the way of people being able to turn left or right safely. So I think that, you know, in respect, I get what the goal is, but, if we tailor it down, then there's less possibility of confusion. But I think that the only way you can get all the confusion out on the table and away down the river, let the water go under the bridge, is quite literally to say, yeah, we're not talking about Tesla walls. We're very keenly interested in commercial development of these batteries, not residential development of these batteries. And if we think that separating these two is important, then one cornerstone, one facet of this law, one subsection, if you will be very specifically, this law does not apply to residential Tesla wall style battery backups for homes. Full stop.
There you go. Like you
Done.
you can put you're right, you just put it right in writing.
You put
This
it
is
right
you
in
just
writing and then it's off. Right? Now, I get that somehow if we have that discussion and five guys decide it should be off rather than the town decide it should be off, that it might be a little bit of a faster process. I'm here to say I've watched fast processes fail. We have that currently right now in the sign issue, which I will imagine you're going to bring up, that is currently at the table with the politicking that is currently going on, which was born out of a legal action that was taken against the town, a number of municipalities, and the town was included in 2002, and that the language was retooled in 2002 so as to not be a target for litigation. But the language actually is a target for litigation. So we have to address that too, because again, past administrations and past boards were short-sighted. They continue to be short-sighted and they didn't think things all the way through. And then I've got to go play cleanup. So you want to know why there's so many, resolutions and laws coming? It's because there's been years and years worth of ridiculous nothingness happening.
It really, it kinda makes you wonder what progress did they make? Was there any
They were
progress done
very
at all in the
they were very specific to make the progress that was specific to their pet projects. So, they made progress on a relationship with Galleria, which ultimately blew up in their face, and Galleria sued the town, and now instead of $125 million worth of rateable, property, we have $61 million worth of rateable property, so that backfired. They were very specific about tailoring the cannabis law, except for they drew the line so haphazardly that anybody who looked at the law would challenge it purely on the borderline because the borderline runs right down the center of 211. So to tell me that one side of 211 it's completely okay to buy cannabis or have a cannabis store, and on the other side of 211 absolutely not. So I mean that's just ridiculous, and it's
That doesn't
ripe
even
with
make sense.
that's my point. That is exactly my point. They have there's a number of legislation like this, a number of them. But at the end of the day, what are we faced with? Well, we're faced with an opportunity where somebody at the town, whether a town resident or a developer, have an opportunity because we've created a loophole in our law, and then all of a sudden by sheer fact that we didn't cross our T's and dot our I's. So we didn't do our homework. We weren't rock stars. We were phoning it in. Because we did that, we now end up with situations where we have existing non-conforming situations that don't abide by the current zoning. We've got zoning challenges. We've got our LUPA challenges. We've got all kinds of problems that we've got to get out in front of because we didn't do our homework.
Right. Yeah. So you know what? You brought it up, so I'm gonna turn back to you brought up the signage
Ah,
issue.
yes.
Yeah. So what is going is there an ordinance regarding when and where you can start doing your political signing? I thought there was like, I
Yes,
thought it was within, like, 90 days, I thought, of the
there
election.
is there is an ordinance, it is in place. It's actually 30 days, is the recommended time
Oh,
frame for signs to go up, for political signs to go up. The rub right now is there's some ambiguity in the language of public access spaces, public spaces like DOT spaces. There is also a component of that ordinance that no political sign can be on town-owned property. But as I'm sure you are aware, my current
it's,
opponent, as well as some other folks, are out there peppering the world with misleading information. I'm also going to say that it's somewhat a bit of a head scratcher that there are no endorsements, but we're drawing
but she's endorsed
parallels
by
and
everybody.
endorsed by Democrats. I immediately got on the phone with the committee and said, "Is there something you guys want to tell me?" To which they're like, "Absolutely not." So, the reality is that this is actually mismarketing. It's misleading, and part of the reason why we have ordinances in place is so that there aren't a plethora of pop-up signs in public spaces, whether it's a political sign or a sign for a taxidermist or a sign to join the Navy or a sign for someone who buys junk cars or a sign somebody buys their house, which was a thing back when I was in office last time. We have ordinances specific to addressing those signs, and they're not allowed in public spaces, full stop, across the board. And the only world where that is not directly, that doesn't speak directly to political signs, is signs outside of 30 days, which is the recommendation. Well, I appreciate it's a recommendation. It's a recommendation of a 30-day window outside of the election. That language was in response to a 2002 lawsuit that the town lost. So at the end of the day, again, I say this all the time, but this is what it is. When you get done sorting through all the details, the town has got exposure. It's got litigation exposure to that effect. It's got litigation exposure to the effect that the signs can go out. And so, consequently, in the spirit uh, of the code, I made a request to the other side that they abide by the code. They promptly put out more signs. I'm driving down the road today. There's more signs out. So their response is, however you want to interpret that response. I'm sure your listeners would understand what I mean when I say there are a lot of different ways to say the same two words. But thank you very much. We're not going in that direction, is the way I'll say it here. Uh, no, go scratch is basically what they're saying. So, the reality is that thank you very much, other side, for putting the light on that. We're going to address that too, because that's a thing that has to be dealt with so that the town doesn't get sued.
Yeah, exactly. It exposes the town, and not to mention that, eventually these signs, by the time we get into within the month of election, these signs are faded, they're mushy, they've fallen over, the wind has knocked them over, and it's the litter. It's litter everywhere. We
I
saw this.
I
We saw this in last year.
100%, and I think that that was the genesis of the sign code to begin with, was that there were a number of county officials and town officials that had to pick up the signs that got left, which is how that same sign code speaks to how quickly you have to pick them up. So the idea is that they fall away into the background. So from a marketing standpoint, it's ambitious to think that somehow that's going to resonate with people. It's not. It's going to disappear into the background. But at the end of the day, that's a choice they want to make. That's their choice. I'm of the mindset that I I'm going to do things for the town that matter. I'm going to help fix the town's money issues. I'm going to work really, really hard to get the town, the stopgap, which I've done, and then the people are going to know what I've done for the town. And when it becomes appropriate to say, "Hey, remember it's me," I'll say, "Hey, remember it's me." I don't think that um, putting out a sign right now is actually worthwhile, but that's their choice. It's not my choice. But what it did do was it turned on a big light as to what you can say on a sign and what you can't say on a sign, and where that line is, and what it means to be on public land versus what it means to be on private land. They can put up all the signs they want right now on private property. They can't do it on public property. And That's a big deal.
Okay, so very interesting. So I'm guessing, so you plan to take action with that? Um,
Yeah, we're looking at what the possible recourse would be, both from a legal standpoint, from a political standpoint, whether or not it even merits. Again, we're still reeling in this world where we've got to be very mindful of the expenses that we take. And
yes.
the building department is already overtaxed, and we've scaled them back 20%, in their overall efforts, so they can't do overtime where it's not really necessary. And so I like to use the term, is the juice worth the squeeze? And that's part of the conversation we're having with the lawyers. Is the juice worth the squeeze at this point? Does it really even matter? And we'll see where that lands.
Okay.
We'll see where it lands.
Oh, all right. Um, so since we're talking about election, this is an election year for you. It's kind of a weird situation where we have a 1 year term versus a typical 2 year term. Actually, you know what? Let me back up. Term limits that came up in the last Spill the Tea meeting. There was a discussion on term limits, and I remember you kind of put the question out there to the audience to see what their ideas was. It was a little bit of a discussion, but then everybody sort of started talking about their roads, and we kind of got off of completely off of the whole term limits. So, you talked about having to do, thinking about doing term limits and adjusting them. So, can you talk about what your vision is for term limits and where you want to see that go, and when and where you want to implement them?
Sure. I can tell you personally, I think that the maximum amount of time that you should be able to serve for any in town at all, in collectively, totally, all the positions that you could possibly be elected for shouldn't go beyond 16 years. And I think that the maximum term
Collectively.
limit collectively. So what I mean by that is this, that if you run for council person and you are elected for council person in, say, Ward 1, you can hold that Ward 1 council person's position for up to 8 years. And I don't think that at that point you have to give it up. The only
Okay.
other thing you could do is run for supervisor or town clerk, because those are townwide positions. Now, town clerk is not on this conversation. Uh, it might end up on this conversation, but I doubt it. Uh, but very much supervisor is on this conversation because it's a very much a political role. And I don't think that you should go beyond 8 years for a supervisor position. So that's how I got to 16 years total. I also believe that certainly for the supervisor position, but also for council people's positions, if you are a new council person or a new supervisor, you don't ramp up to speed if you are coming in brand spanking new, wet behind the ears. The earliest you can ramp up to speed is a year and a half, a year if you're really savvy. I was pretty savvy in 20 when I showed up. There were a lot of things I didn't know that I stumbled into that were used against me actively, because the folks who were
Yes.
there knew exactly what pitfalls I was going to fall into and made sure that I was pointed in that direction. Um, Now, in this day and age, I can tell you, I pretty much understand what the job is about. And not for nothing, my executive background allows me the opportunity to be able to execute the job in the successful way I've done in the past 6 months. That said, I also think that you need a little bit more time if you're coming in brand spanking new. So maybe 2 years is too short. Perhaps it should be a 4 year term. And what does that mean? That means that you spend 4 years, you spend 2 terms in one seat and 2 terms in another seat, and then you're on to bigger and better things. And you're leaving space for additional voices to come in and populate behind you. That's my personal feeling on what term limits should be. You'll probably get a different answer from Councilman Vanilla and Councilman Saleo and Councilman Johnson and Councilman Coyne. Councilman Johnson and Councilman Coyne's their sitting dais position ends in November regardless, because they're not running. And they've also been in the chair for 10 years on either side. So if we do get to term limits, it's highly likely they're not coming back in a councilman position. So perhaps maybe they could try for supervisor. Here's what I'm going to say about that. given the current economic status and anybody who might have been attached to that, good luck, because there's no shaking that off. But
Yeah.
there just isn't. You just can't be connected to the disaster that has unfolded, that has placed the town at this place economically, and somehow think that you can make a cogent argument to anyone that you should be allowed to have the checkbook again. That said, good luck. Again, I'm going to say good luck, and go for whatever's on the docket. The goal is this: to put on for referendum on this November's ballot term limits, a local law for term limits, whatever that is. And we'll get there by having the public referendum, and we'll open the public, it's open to comment now. You can speak on it at any point in time. If you come to a town board meeting, you can speak on it specific to items on the agenda. That means you get up in the early part of the 3-minute open to the public phase, or other items open to the town. So you have an additional 3 minutes at any point in time. You can write in until we close this discussion. You can write in your thoughts on term limits. I would encourage anybody who's got thoughts on that to send them in. I will say, I disagree with the other side's position that somehow term limits and everything that's bad about them only exists at the state and federal level. I'm here to tell you
Come on.
that we are in the economic place that we are in right this very minute at the town because of the lack of term limits, because individuals who should not have been sitting in the wheelhouse with the checkbook had been left to their own devices for a decade or longer. So
Couple of
that's,
decades.
yeah, a couple of decades for at least one of them. So yeah, 100%. There's my spiel on term limits.
Right. Well, yeah, that's for folks, that's kind of an important thing that you're saying, a referendum. So the decision on term limits is going to be with the public, right? You're going to put that on the ballot.
Correct.
So
Yeah,
okay.
100% correct. The only decision we make as a town board is whether or not to put it on the ballot. It can't be decided by us. If we don't put it on the ballot, then it just goes away. But my intention is to get it on the ballot because I think that this is something that speaks directly to our current economic standing. It speaks to our future economic standing. And I think that I've heard for a long enough time, oh, it's because the deadbeats are in there and, we just need to get rid of our electeds. Well, that's great. Let's get rid of our electeds. Like, let's put a timeline so that they have to get out of the way.
Right. That makes sense. That makes sense. Well, this has been great. We had a lot of important things to cover here, and a few technical difficulties in the middle of it.
It's true. It's true.
But first of all, where can people reach out to you if they have questions? You mentioned that if they had questions about anything that came up in the town board, so they can email or email you or the town. So if you could let us know where to reach you.
100%. Very supervisor at townofwallkill.com. Town of Wallkill is all one word.com. We're still in a .com world. So you can email me there. I see those emails. My associate in the office sees those emails. We respond to all of them. It doesn't matter how many there are. We respond to all of them. You can call my office. You can call my direct line and try to get through to me. I'm very frequently not at my desk because I'm out running around, but you might catch me at my desk. And if you do, I'm happy to speak directly to you about the questions that you have. You can get on the docket. I'm meeting people in the morning, and I'm meeting people in the afternoon, and I'm meeting people in the evening, and I'm meeting people on weekends. It's a 24/7, 7 days a week kind of thing. So yeah, you can. There's quite a few ways to get a hold of me if you've got questions about any of this stuff.
Okay. Awesome. Awesome. Yeah. Well, that kind of dispels the rumor that you're working an hour a week from the other
Oh my
side.
God, I wish. I I'm told I'm married. I haven't seen my wife in easily 5.5 months. I hung out with her yesterday. It was kind of good. She had a hot opportunity for me to go over to the fishing derby, so she came along. It was really great to have some quality time with the wife and still do some double duty doing some town work. But yeah, we're kind of crazy busy, and we are going to continue this pace for the duration that I will sit in the chair. That's just there's a lot to do, a lot of cleanup that needs to happen, a lot of forward thinking so that moving into the next 10 and 15 and 20 years, the town of Wallkill is really set up so that if we do get the term limits, I can leave believing that we've moved the needle. And that's the goal. I want to move the needle.
That sounds good. All right, folks. Listen, if you have any comments below or anything you want to ask Frank or have Frank come back on the show and discuss, leave it in the comments below. As always, like, share, and subscribe. Click that bell so you get notified the next time Frank is on and any other videos that drop. And also when we go live on Tuesday nights, we'll have you back for a live stream. That would be fun.
No, yeah,
Um,
for sure. I'm sorry I missed it this Tuesday, but I will be on for a live. You guys seem to have a great time. There's a lot of fun happening. Um, you might
can I
get the
tell you the
you
live?
might get the unfiltered me. I'm just gonna let you know that the 11 o'clock show is very different than the 7 o'clock show.
Oh, then you need to join us. We also have Neil and I have a new project, the Daily Gripe, that we're starting to put content together and get that out there. And that is our sort of our national view podcast. And that's where we are. Our slogan is we are unscripted, unfiltered, and occasionally unhinged. So yeah, you'd probably fit right in.
Oh, I am definitely I'm down to come and hang with you there for sure.
Awesome. All right, guys. We're going to wind up here and we will see you soon. Take care. Be safe. We love you.
Thank you very
Take
much.
Bye bye.